Let's get joined up. This week's show is sponsored by Bandcamp.com, an online record store and music community where passionate fans discover, connect with, and directly support the artists they love. There's thousands of bands and artists on there, including my band, the Rye Dogs, whose second album, Pigs Might Fly, is out right now. Here's a quick snippet of the title track, which is also available on Spotify, Amazon, and Apple Music.
Because your eyes may be weeping, but your conscience is sleeping. So baby, don't you cry. Your faces are drying and you say...
It's totally free to join Bandcamp, and as the Rye Dogs are brand new members, we're now looking to grow our fan base, so your support would be greatly appreciated. Just search the Rye Dogs, that's W-R-Y Dogs, and hit the follow button. Right, now we can cue the theme tune.
Joined up writing.
Hello and welcome to the Joined Up Writing podcast, where a little procrastination can go a long way. I'm Wayne Kelly and it's episode 161 with psychological thriller writer Emma Curtis, returning to talk about her latest book, Invite Me In, as well as giving us the lowdown on how she plots her books and generates ideas in the first place. Plus she gives us a reality check on how pitching and writing books tends to work once you've signed to an agent or publisher. Before we get to that, a very quick catch-up from me and an apology for leaving you hanging for a few weeks. My day job has kicked back into frenetic activity, so I've been busy filming and editing with a few nights away and just not so much time to record shows. Despite that, I have been writing, albeit in a stop-start fashion, and having to lean heavily on the support of my new critique group. For those of you who don't know, I decided to do a total rewrite of my novel Safe Hands, introducing another POV and taking the plot in an entirely different direction. That's the plan anyway. But what I've found, at least in the early stages of the book, is that I felt drawn to the original draft, wanting to cherry pick scenes I like and just kind of redrafting those. And I now realise that's both stupid and lazy for a couple of reasons. Firstly, if I continue to do that, how can I let the new viewpoint and tone of the book take me somewhere new? You know, if I keep jumping back on the same rails, I'm definitely going to end up at the same location, and I was never truly happy with the ending of the original version anyway. Secondly, every time I've pushed myself to write something new from scratch, it's been immeasurably better than the first book. There's more depth, the writing is better, the characters are more nuanced. Yes, it's bloody hard forging ahead and trying to forget what I did before, and I'm constantly fretting about where my characters might lead me and how I'm going to tie everything together. But isn't that what a first draft is supposed to feel like? Shouldn't I be excited by that? Well, I am, sort of, now, but I definitely wasn't feeling like that last week. I had a major crisis of confidence, honestly thinking the book was terrible and questioning what kind of novel I'm trying to write. It isn't a fast-paced heist book or a breakneck thriller or even a traditional crime book so far anyway. So how the hell will I be able to pitch it when I'm done? Am I wasting my time? Can I even write? These were just some of the questions swirling around my brain when I submitted my latest chunk of the book to my critique group. And I hadn't heard back from anyone for a few days, and our online meeting was fast approaching. And you know, as you do in these situations, I convinced myself that it must be so bad that no one even wants to engage with it or even try to explain everything that's wrong with it. Stupid, irrational thoughts, I now realise, but I was flailing a bit by the time the meeting came around. And by that time, I'd received some notes on the manuscript by email, all helpful critique, suggesting improvements, questioning certain scenes or whatever. But I hadn't really had much time to read and process them because I'd been working away. And I confessed my worries to Erica Waller, who runs the group, before the meeting. Erica is very direct, shall we say, and she tackled my fears head on, telling everyone how I was feeling right at the start of the meeting. And although I was initially mortified, but then the lovely members of the group all stepped up and told me they were genuinely shocked I felt that way. They said nice stuff about my writing, and they admitted they all feel like that about their own work at various stages along the way. it's just part of the process, and that I should definitely just keep going because there's something there, and they like my writing and they like the characters and all the rest of it. And, you know, self-doubt can be crippling, but it's also part of what drives us to kind of improve and hone what we do. Basically, I just need to get a grip. They all suggested I stop looking over the stuff that I've written and don't bother with the edits just yet, and just kind of push on with the story. So that's where I am now, and their support and advice has been a massive help to me. I feel privileged to be in such a small group of talented, successful and experienced writers who let an unpublished upstart like me into their gang. So the least I can do to repay that faith is write the damn book and make sure it's as good as it possibly can be. So that's my little self-doubt odyssey for this week, but what about everyone else? How are your projects going? What challenges are you battling? What support systems do you have in place? Let me know, as I'd love to give you a mention, and I always enjoy conversing with listeners. And you can do that by emailing wayne@waynekellywrites.com, tweeting me @JUPodcast, or dropping me a line on the FB page. Also, don't forget to join the email mailing list at joinedupwriting.co.uk. It's totally free, and you can read a couple of my short stories when you sign up, and you'll be the first to find out about upcoming shows and events. Right, let's get to today's interview with Emma Curtis. So Emma was born in Brighton and now lives in London with her husband. After raising 2 children and working various jobs, her fascination with the darker side of domestic life inspired her to write acclaimed psychological suspense thrillers like One Little Mistake, When I Find You, The Night You Left, Keep Her Quiet, and her latest book, Invite Me In, which is out right now. So here's the chat that we had just yesterday, actually.
Joined up writing.
Okay, Emma, thanks a million for joining me on Joined Up Writing again, revisited. It's great to hear from you. So why don't we just start off just by reminding us whereabouts you're speaking from, and tell us how things are going.
I'm speaking from Richmond in London. I'm upstairs in my daughter's old bedroom, which I've converted into my office. It's all going very well. I've just brought out book 5, which is called Invite Me In, and I'm writing another one. Actually, it wasn't going that well because I wrote another one and it didn't pan out. So I'm being optimistic here. I'm writing a second next book.
That's good. Well, I think you have to be optimistic doing this, don't you? I think
You do.
It's safe to say. You just have to keep trucking. Well, why don't you tell me about that latest book, Invite Me In? For people that don't know, give us a sense of what the premise is.
Invite Me In is about a woman who's struggling in her marriage. She's tied to a very controlling man, and for various reasons can't just walk away from it. She has a buy-to-let flat, and the tenant that arrives, she kind of not falls in love with, but sees him as as a way out and invites him into their lives, knowing that it's a mirage and nothing will ever happen. But as soon as he's kind of got his foot in the door of her home and her marriage, things start to spiral out of control.
It's great, and I've read it and I loved it. It was really, really good. Great twists and turns and things, and the kind of classic setup, and then kind of reels you in. I really enjoyed it, so congratulations.
Oh, well, thank you for reading it.
No problem. So do you remember kind of what kicked off the idea in the first place? I suppose it was a long time ago now with how traditional publishing works.
I remember what kicks off all of them, because they're always dramatic things or something somebody's told me about their own lives. So they don't tend to come out of thin air. They tend to come from a conversation. And this was a friend who had a buy-to-let flat, and what happens in the beginning of Invite Me In happened to them. Her husband was decorating it, and somebody rang the doorbell and, just chancing their luck, said, "Hello, I'm your new tenant." And this was a woman that they took on. They checked her references and went through the agency, but they took her on, and she was a nightmare. It was awful. It took a long time to get rid of her.
Wow.
So that it's just that thing where you take somebody on trust and face value, and you invite them into your lives, a bit like vampires.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you have to invite them in, and you certainly did.
Yeah.
So, I mean, were there particular themes or whatever that you kind of wanted to explore, or do you tend to find that stuff comes out after you've kind of written the first draft?
I mean, sometimes people very usefully tell you what themes they've found. And it was more, I mean, I'd had a conversation with a friend who had known since university, but who in about 20 years ago was paralysed in a road traffic accident.
Mm-hmm.
And he's a brilliant chap. He's sunny natured. He's made something of his life since it, and he's great. But he asked me jokingly to write in a character in a wheelchair and to make him, not a particularly pleasant person.
Mm.
So I'd been thinking about it for about 3 years, and then when I was thinking about Eliza's husband in this book, I just thought, why not? It makes it interesting to have a controlling husband who's unable to control you physically, although he is a bit physical, but mainly it's psychological control.
Yeah, and I was going to talk to you about that from the point of view, it's kind of refreshing to see somebody in a wheelchair that's not, the kind of the saint kind of character. I mean, he's as you say, he has got all those qualities that you mentioned about in terms of being a really strong character and overcoming adversity, and
that was really
making
important.
making a go of his life and being successful, and kind of refusing to be kind of seen as disabled, if you like. But then the other side of that coin is that he can be very manipulative and kind of controlling over his wife.
Yes, yeah. No, it was important to have two sides to him. I don't like characters who are either good or bad. And he definitely had a good side. It's just that his bad side was exacerbated by the restrictions in his life. It became more possessive, more controlling.
It was
but
interesting.
He wasn't a thoroughly bad egg.
No, but then, like you say, there's not too many of those, fortunately, in real life.
Wouldn't have wanted to be married to him.
No, absolutely not. So, I mean, it's written in first person, and why did you decide to go with that point of view, and why do you think first person works so well for these kinds of psychological thrillers? Because this genre is often kind of there's elements of first person, even if it's just one of the perspectives is told from that.
Yes, it is used quite a lot, but not across the board. And it's quite refreshing sometimes to read a book that's third person past, the kind of old school way. I think when you're doing deep point of view like that and you're in somebody's head, it just comes naturally to write it. And sometimes I've started off writing it differently, and then I've realised, 2 chapters in, I haven't even noticed I've been writing in the first person point of view. And I don't know whether that's habit or whether it just, because you're kind of having to put yourself inside that person, hoping the reader does too, having the present and I. It can be a little clunky. You have to be careful not to have endless sentences beginning I.
That's tricky though, isn't it, sometimes?
And making so they can sound very self-absorbed. But I suppose when we're thinking about ourselves, we are self-absorbed anyway, you can't help it, so...
Yeah, and if you write a journal or anything like that, that's obviously... Well, it doesn't have to be, I suppose, but most journals are written in first person. And, I should imagine most of those are I did this. But I know, I agree, it often comes back as critique, doesn't it, when you write in first person?
Yes.
That's some of the critique that comes back is, well, this paragraph is, you've started 25 sentences and they all start with the word I. But it's tricky sometimes.
It's tricky, but everybody is the centre of their own personal story. And when you have one point of view character and it's you have to remember that for even the bad people or the peripheral characters, they are all at the centre of their own story.
Absolutely,
so they're all kind of, everybody comes at it like that. So you have to somehow, you can do multiple points of view, but for this one I didn't want to, I just wanted her. But you still have to see that Dan and that Martin, what they're doing to themselves is perfectly rational. They've rationalised it, and they don't think they're, Martin certainly doesn't think he's doing anything wrong. It's his
and I think in the case of this particular book, I think it works particularly well because it kind of emphasises that sense of being trapped. Her being trapped. She's kind of trapped in it, as we all are to a certain extent, but she's trapped with herself. But she's also trapped within that situation. Thought it worked really well. What do you think of I think you've kind of answered it to a certain extent because you, as you say, you tend to find yourself writing in first person, and that's kind of what you feel comfortable with. What do you think are the pros and cons of each for you, do you think? Why do you, because there can be limitations with both, can't there? And first person is difficult sometimes for a whole novel, as you say, if you want to show what's going on in other parts of the story or with other characters.
Yeah, and I've done books that have been multiple points of view, and sometimes you change the point of view just so that if you've got two women, it helps to change the voice. And I think that very much when people are reading by Kindle, I know I find it has to be really clear who's speaking. And as it's not like a book where you can flick back naturally, it's a bit of a palaver.
Yeah.
It's like to be extra clear, to change the point of view, just really helps place people where they are in the book. So I sell a lot of digital, so I'm quite aware that you have to give people a bit of a map.
Uh-huh.
You can get lost in Kindle. You're sitting on the tube. Next thing you know, you've no idea who this I person is. Everybody's I.
That is a really good point. I'd never actually thought about that from the Kindle. I read a lot of books on Kindle, and that's a good point. I hadn't really thought of that before.
Well, I think you have to be practical. People are tired and they're on the way from work and they're reading a thriller. They don't want to have to keep flicking back to see whose thoughts are in
and where they are. And I think because speaking for myself, I read every day, but it tends to be really kind of piecemeal. It'd be like a little bit in the morning and then a little bit at night time. And depending on how tired I am at night time, it can be really short. I can probably be reading for sort of 10 minutes and then I'm thinking, well, I need to go to sleep. So it can be quite fragmented sometimes, can't it? And if you can't skip back or you kind of need to keep your head in the story, it's kind of that's a good point that you make there.
Yes, and otherwise, it's just if you've got multiple points of view, it refreshes it a bit. I think to swap them. It's better to do it differently.
Yeah.
The only one I don't like is the second person, is when everybody's addressed as you.
That's hard. Yeah.
I find that is quite tiring.
I agree. It's really difficult to write as well. If you've ever had a go at writing it, it's just so unnatural. It seems to me. Yeah. And I think with this particular genre and thrillers in general, it seems to me secrets are kind of a big part of what drives the plot, both in terms of characters having secrets that they keep from others, but also in terms of them keeping, secrets from the reader, if you like. And in my experience, it can be really tricky to do that in first person as well, because you either have to kind of create an unreliable narrator or come up with creative ways of avoiding being really explicit about certain things. Do you find that too? And how do you kind of get around that, do you think?
Yeah, you can feel a bit cheated if you've been with this narrator all along. It turns out they're the bad guy, and you've been in their thoughts. You know that can, I think, can be a bit of a cheat. It does happen. I don't know. I think there's secrets, and there's the secrets where the reader's thinking, why don't they just speak to each other, and then it'll all be fine. So you have to be reasonable. If there's a book where everybody's just not telling people things that really in real life they would have told them, and that's what's driving the plot, that can be really annoying. So you have to be careful of that. Lying is a different thing to keeping a secret, isn't it? 'Cause that's more active deceit rather than just not telling. And I think that in some ways works better, but whether your narrator is lying or not, they can lie to the other characters, but if they're lying to the reader as well, that's where you get into slightly murky territory, and it can be a bit unsatisfying. I think you have to.
And I think sometimes it's
a reason, like they lost their memory.
I think sometimes it's the omission thing, because I'm writing something at the minute, and one of the perspectives, one of them's in first person and the other one's in third person. But there's a kind of it's not really a twist, but it's something, there's a bit of information I want to withhold relatively early on in the book, but it does mean essentially that a character, for whatever reason, for the very early part of the book, they can't ever actually refer to their son by their name, because it spoils a bit of information later. And it's fine, but when I'm writing, sometimes I think, well, it would be natural that she would say that his name at that point, so I need to kind of find another way to do it because I don't want to reveal it. I think it's little things like that sometimes. And
I think you can get away with that, though.
I think you can. I think it's more like, I think it's kind
intriguing.
Of... Yeah. And I think it's just kind of making sure that it's natural, as you say, and not cheating too much. There's always going to be a bit of cheating, but...
I mean, it's how many knots you have to tie yourself in.
Yeah.
Maybe you can get away with one knot, but if you're writing without a name and you're tying yourself into all sorts of knots, then it can kind of slow things down. But I think the actual concept of not naming the child, if it's part of the plot, is perfectly valid, and I'd go for it.
Yeah, thanks. So like all of your books, Invite Me In is obviously very tightly plotted. It's got twists and turns, and it's fast paced. So give us, if you can, give us a sense of how you go about plotting this kind of story. Have you got any kind of practical tips for people that are interested in working in this genre?
Yeah, I mean, you sort of beware the really, really interesting premise. Sometimes the really out there idea. They quite often don't have the legs for an entire book. I think if you get an idea, then you limit the number of people involved in the idea. So you'll have your two main people, which is Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker, whatever. Yeah. And then there are a very small number of peripherals who have an active role, and absolutely no one who is just, if you can possibly help it, a friend of a friend. They do slip in. So if you've got your premise and you've got your people, then you just sit down and you literally stare at the wall and go for walks.
Yeah.
You need the overall question you need, and that's what I always struggle with. I found I've written a whole synopsis and actually not figured out what question I'm asking. Yeah. So it's useful to have a question at the start of, why did so-and-so murder her husband, or, whatever it is, to set that up at the beginning. But plotting it's actually quite nightmarish, because everything you do kind of wrecks the last thing you thought.
Yeah, it's the ripple effect.
Yes, and then there's the other really important thing is everything has to be incredibly strongly motivated. So if you've got a brilliant piece of drama, but it's not really motivated, but it has an impact on the plot, but why on earth would that person have done? You've got to be careful of that, and it's quite tempting to do that.
Especially, I should imagine, if you've got a problem to solve as well, sometimes it can be, this all of a sudden this thing happens and kind of solves it or moves it forward or whatever, and it could be quite tempting.
Have known that, or everything you do, it'll open another question somewhere else, but you hope that the question it opens is going forward, not taking you back to the beginning, because you've got to reset up something. It's a really complicated process, and a lot of it, I have to say, is a wing and a prayer. I think even if you say that you're a plotter, there's still an element of pantsing in there
when you're actually doing it. So when you sit down to work on the next book, whatever that might be, do you like to generate lots of ideas first and then kind of whittle it down to one, or do you how do you stop yourself from just following the easy route or repeating some of the same kind of old tropes and cliches? Because I think that's for all of us, it's kind of natural to fall into that even without realizing it. I've done it lots of times when you start thinking of an idea and you start coming up, and then you think this happens, and you think, hang on, that's the same as such and such film or that other book that I just read or whatever. So I need to discount that, and I need to come up with something that's less obvious. So how do you go about that?
I think you decide you're not going to get too hung up on it, because frankly there are so many thrillers out there and so many films, and practically every sister has told a lie, every brother has, every mother has told a lie, and there are only so many aunts and uncles that can be abducted, and so you have to just decide what your story is, and then it's your original telling of it. And you can't, the amount of times I've been halfway through a book and I've read somebody else's and thought, oh my god, they've done this and I've done this, but then people have said to me, oh, I'm really sorry, but I hadn't read your book and I did this, and it sort of echoes what you've done, and I'm just, at this point, I don't mind at all, because it happens to everybody.
Yeah, and I think you're right anyway. I think there's only so many stories you can tell, and it's usually they're bound to have some of the same ingredients, but the overall meal is going to taste different. I think
exactly, they have the ingredients that people want. There are certain tropes, whatever, that people actually actively want to read and to buy, and that's why I suppose why a lot of the covers are very similar.
Yeah.
People like it, and the same with romance. They want boy meets girl or boy meets boy or whatever it is, and they want a happy ending, but they don't. What they want is the journey.
Yeah, They just want to enjoy it as they go
Yeah.
along. Yeah,
So
absolutely.
you don't have to be so original that you're out in space.
Yeah, absolutely. So, kind of on that subject about the idea of generating ideas and working on the next book, you kind of mentioned at the top there, just you kind of alluded to the fact you're starting work on the next book, or you're involved in the next book, which is actually you kind of mentioned off air at least that the idea that you had before that maybe didn't quite go how you wanted. I think people probably assume that you just, once you're a few books in and you've been published and you've got an agent or whatever, that you just kind of move very gracefully from one project to the next project to the next project, and you just keep churning these things out. Give us a sense of how it actually works.
Well, I mean, up until now, it has been quite straightforward. I've finished one and started another while the other one's coming out. Then I wrote Invite Me in lockdown, and I think just by the end of that year, I had just got a bit fed up or whatever it was. Anyway, writing the other book, it was just flat and it didn't work, and it wasn't very thrilling, which is the sort of number one job it has to do.
Yeah.
So I'd showed my agent, I'd showed a friend, and they'd both been very polite, but had said no. So I just feel at the moment that I'm not going to hurry. I think it's almost like a 7-year itch. I think I've written all these books, and I suddenly feel like just taking a step back and starting something at my own pace. Like when you write your first novel,
Yeah.
you take a year or 2 years or 10 years over it.
Yeah.
Without anybody on your back. And I'm between contracts now. I finished the third 2-book contract with Transworld. So until I actually submit another idea to them and they say yes to it, I'm not under contract, so I'm not under pressure. And my editor has left, so I have an interim editor who's absolutely lovely, but I don't feel as
It's kind of a new relationship, if you like.
well, it's not. Yes, it should be very good, but she's also, I know for a fact, she'll have a lot on her plate and won't be desperately wanting,
Yeah.
So I'm just slowing it down and taking my time and getting the idea right, especially after writing an entire book that then I've put in a drawer, metaphorically. I don't want to do that again, so I want to make sure that everything's right before I even put the first sentence down.
And when
I'm plotting.
Yeah, and when you were writing that book that for the time being anyway, is back in a drawer, did you have that sense when you were writing it that maybe it wasn't quite the same as the things you'd done before, that you weren't quite feeling it?
Yeah, it wasn't the same. It was a slightly different kind of genre, more crimey. It was an odd one, and I did like it, and I did believe in it. Otherwise, I wouldn't have written it. But I could see afterwards why it wasn't psychological. It was more whodunit, and I don't think that. I think psychological is my strength. I don't think whodunit is. But it could be in the future. But no, I was just trying something different. It was all part of feeling a bit kind of, I don't know, doldrumy after the COVID year. Just wanted to make a change.
Freshen things up.
Yeah, but I've put back in my box and writing psychological suspense again.
And it'll still be there anyway. You can still go back to it and revive it at some time if you wanted to, or take bits from it. So, but I mean, for a lot of people that haven't yet been published or whatever, or maybe they're submitting now, whatever, I think a lot of them will probably be surprised. I mean, I know, speaking to another author friend of mine recently, and she'd written her first book and it had been pretty successful, and I think she got a 2-book deal. So then she submitted the second book and they were like, not really sure about this. Okay, so she went away and she wrote another book, and then they were like, well, yeah, I'm not sure it's quite commercial, probably needs to be a bit closer to the first book that you wrote. And so she's kind of literally like, and I think the fourth one now, they're like, no, they really like it, and she's working on that. But the idea that she's kind of almost 3 books on from the first book, trying to get book 2 or whatever, the fact that she's still having to pitch it to her agent or an editor at the publishers or whatever, that would come as a surprise to some people. I think they think, well, if you've got I know that sometimes if you get a 2-book deal and it's at the beginning, you might already have written the second book and they already know what it is. But in instances where they don't know what that book is, just explain to us kind of how that works, because again, people probably just assume, well, they just publish the next thing that you do.
No, it's not uncommon. It happened to me after my first book. as well. I wrote another one and they didn't like it. And I tried to change it and it didn't work. So I wrote another one. In fact, it happened twice. So, you think you learned your lessons. I think basically it's, if you're writing genre fiction, the publishers want the same but different. And I used to read Georgette Heyer, and I read them because I knew what I was getting, and that's what I loved.
Yeah,
I
sure.
read them voraciously, and it didn't matter that they had similar things, and that's what I wanted.
It's a bit like Columbo. I absolutely love the TV show Columbo,
Well,
even though
exactly,
it's literally the same every week, pretty much. I know it's a different crime and it's a different
no, but it's the
villain.
point at which things happen, and where the the sort of spikes are, and at what point he comes close or has a disaster and then comes close, and then we know, and if he didn't catch the baddie in the end, you'd be absolutely furious.
Yeah, exactly. But we still keep going back, and it just works.
Yes, yeah. So it does. I don't think. Yeah, I don't. You have to do something different each time, but it has to also be what the readers loved about your last book as well. That has to have that element, and that's partly voice, but it's partly the drama and the way you create the drama.
So when you kind of get, you've submitted, say, that other book that is gone back in the drawer for the time being, and they come back and they very politely say no. I know it sounds like an obvious question, but how did that feel?
Well, the first time it happened, I was just, I was quite shocked because I didn't expect that. But also, it was right at the beginning when psychological suspense wasn't quite such a big thing. I think it was about the same time as Girl on the Train came out, so the publishers all wanted that and Gone Girl, but I didn't really know about that, so I was just writing for myself again. And so I was suggested to, I went away and read some psychological suspense and then come up with something better. And even at that time, I just didn't understand the whole concept of reading other books to see what was I wanted. I was so naive going into it. I'd had nothing to do with the publishing industry before I got an agent. I was completely, I didn't have author friends. I didn't go to conferences. I had no idea that it wasn't on Twitter, that there was a world out there. So I knew I was totally naive. It was a big learning curve.
And I suppose with that book that you're talking about there, they knew that presumably you'd kind of given them some kind of overview or a synopsis or something. They knew what you were writing, did they?
The one that they rejected, no, I'd just written it. Right,
okay, fine, okay.
I think I'd talked to them about it vaguely and, given them an idea, and they'd said, oh, that sounds nice. Right. So and also it was a 2-book contract. So yeah, it was an odd one. I think after that, the next time round, it was more my fault that it went wrong because I should have known what I was doing. But writers don't.
Does anybody know what they're doing, Emma? That's the question. I don't think they do, really. I think that's part of it.
You write while you're in the book. You're writing this drama and it's all there. You don't really think about whether it's ticking the right boxes at all. You're just involved in it, and sometimes it works, sometimes it does okay, sometimes it doesn't. You just cannot. I don't even think publishers can predict.
No, I don't think anybody can predict. But I also think probably not in all instances, because I have met and spoken to some writers that kind of also have that really strong sense of marketing and all that kind of thing. But I would say most people that I speak to, they don't. Especially about their own book. They have it about other people's work. I think we're all quite good at that. We can look at someone else's book and go, I'll tell you what this is like, or I'll tell you what this is, the reason I like this is this is the bit you should push for this book or whatever, or it would fit on the shelf. But trying to do that about something you've written yourself or that you're writing, it seems to be almost impossible when you're actually doing it.
It is, because you want to be left alone. You don't want your editor sitting on your shoulder. So I put off showing them anything as long as I possibly can.
Yeah.
But I think unless I've just written a dud, and then I'm more like the one I'm writing now, I will show them up to a detailed synopsis and make sure everybody's happy, just because I just don't want to waste.
Yeah. So if we take the sort of practicalities of like the one that you're doing now, And you're talking about there about doing a detailed synopsis. So will you do that detailed synopsis before you kind of start actually writing, or will you have written some of the novel before you get to that point?
No, I'll talk to my agent about the idea and have a brief synopsis. And then if she likes it, then I'll work that up into something of about 3,000 or 4,000 words. And then she'll look at that and submit it to Transworld.
And is that kind of normally how you work in terms? Is that kind of how you work through your plotting as well? Does that help you with that?
Yeah, well, it does a bit. It tends to change as you go along, and I always put too much stuff in, so I always lose quite a bit. But I think as long as I feel confident, if I feel like I've got enough going on, and then if they say yes and they offer you an advance, and you say yes or no, and then off you go.
Then you start, and then you've signed on the dotted line. And do you feel pressure at that point?
No, it's kind of a relief if everybody's happy, and then you can just sit down, spend 3 or 4 months on the first draft, and you are alone at that point, and that's nice. You can just do your thing. But then after that, then it starts getting pressured again as it goes to. My agent's very kind. She does read my novels before they go to the editor. So I'll make a few changes for her, and then it'll go, and then there'll be lots of changes.
And do you tend to be, do you tend to get the same kinds of changes on your books? Is it I'm talking about initially when you first submit things. Is it the same sorts of things that kind of recur, that come back? Is it structural things, or is it character things, or what sorts of things do you tend to get back?
There used to be, right at the beginning, it was structural, and that was hell. You'd get something, a letter back saying, could you restructure this or put this event at the end, not the beginning, and then the whole book has to be turned around. But that's one of the useful things about doing a detailed synopsis, is you tend to avoid the awful. There always are some bits of structure, but it'd be more, could you take this wodge out of the middle because it's not needed, so lose 30,000 words in the middle, or whatever, or start later. And my ends tend to start off incredibly complicated,
right?
So they always need simplifying a bit, otherwise who's in which room with the gun, or whatever. It all gets so complicated, people running around.
So you kind of have to
I like a dramatic ending, but yes, they do. They're still the same. They'll still ask you to, work on a character. I've never been told to make somebody nice. I know a lot of authors grumble that they're told their character is unlikable. But I think with Invite Me In, from the reviews, I think all the characters are generally unlikable. So take the blinder there.
It's just who's the least unlikable. Yeah,
it's hard when people are doing horrid things, and even with suspense, often your hero or heroine is also a flawed character and getting herself into situations where she doesn't act really in the way that you'd want her to. Otherwise, you just get a goody-goody.
Yeah, and the other thing is that is often the main driver of drama or conflict, is when people make bad choices. And it's making bad choices and still keeping the reader on your side. Yeah. That's difficult, and sometimes it works with some books I read and some of mine, and you don't know until you get reviews and find out whether you get reviews saying I didn't like any of the characters, or one of The Night You Left. So the only character I liked was the dog. But you can't please everybody all the time. No, absolutely. How are you as regards that with reviews and things in the age of Amazon reviews and all the rest of it?
Oh, I've discovered this thing. If you look, like, got some new reviews, if you click on reviews and then just tap the 5-star ones, you can see the 5-star reviews.
That sounds like a great idea.
So I don't really look anymore. I'm not actually fussed. And if I do look and somebody said something mean, I just think, oh well, that's nice, there's an extra review.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I think right at the beginning you take it so personally, but by the time you've written 4 or 5 books, well, it's not really personal. Everybody gets, the odd mean-spirited
Well,
remark in
some of them
reviews
are
and-
absolutely ridiculous as well. Like,
Well, some people just
give
enjoy it.
Yeah,
you know.
and some people will give it like 1 star because they'll say, "I absolutely love this book. It was absolutely brilliant." But when it turned up in the post, the cover was damaged. 1 star, and you're like, "Oh my god, the book! It's about the book."
Yeah.
You know.
But I don't think a lot of readers really understand that.
No, they probably
And
don't.
you know, I think the best of people.
Yeah, that's the best. That's the best way to be. Well, you obviously don't think the best of people, otherwise you wouldn't write crime stories, or you know.
Well, they tend to be accidental crime or the malicious.
I believe you. So what was I going to say? Yeah. So in terms of like abandoning ideas and working. I mean, so when you're actually kind of creating these ideas. Or you're coming up with so when you sat down with your most recent book, so for example, I know you're not going to give anything away about that yet; it's too early. But did you have a few ideas that you kind of whittled down, and kind of what makes you decide that that's the one that's got the legs, so to speak?
You have to start. It depends what you're given. If what comes to you is a situation like the tenant one, you just try and think of a story that worked with it. I mean, the easiest thing is when actually the story comes to you rather than the situation at the beginning, the premise that kicks it off. Because the premise that kicks it off is usually is the easy bit.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're walking along and you suddenly think of a story, that's a gift. And I think that's happened to me with Keep Her Quiet. That happened. So suddenly you've got a plot, and all you have to do is write your characters. But that's one. But normally, what happens first is somebody will tell you something over drinks and in a pub, and you think, "God, that'll make a fantastic story." And then you sit down and then you work at it, and you think, "Actually, this is not going anywhere."
It's not
But
enough.
quite often, it does go somewhere.
Yeah.
And then occasionally you have 2 stories, and you find you can weave them.
And you mentioned about the detailed synopsis there. It sounds to me. Or it seems to me a detailed synopsis that's sort of 3,000 or 4,000 words would be a lot easier to write than the synopsis that you have to send when you actually submit your book when you're first starting out. Expect it to be sort of a page long or something, which I find incredibly difficult.
I like them. I think all you do is you sit down and you write them quite quickly, what happens, and then anything that smacks of saying "and then" you take out and rewrite. So you're not saying "and then," but basically in your head, this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens.
Yeah.
And if you've got all your "and thens" in, and then you rewrite it without them. Like, I've always quite enjoyed doing synopsises, especially if I've written 2,000 words and I have to get it down to 1,000.
Uh-huh.
That's just quite a nice challenge. Nobody expects subplots in them. I think people are frightened of them, but they're not. It's like going to the dentist. It's not that bad.
I think, yeah. I mean, I think you've hit the nail on the head though, that with the subplot thing, because I'll often, people have said, "Oh, don't include every subplot and all that." But I think but that's what's quite difficult when you're writing it, because in your brain you're sort of thinking, yeah, but that's that's such a cool little subplot thing that happens there. Or there's that little. I feel like I should tell them about that, and it's a bit that I think that's all, and I think it all, especially when you're first starting out and you're submitting. I think a lot of it is because you're frightened that you're going to cut out the thing that makes them.
Grabs them.
Yeah,
but you won't, because it's not that important. That they've seen. I'm happy. Send me your synopsis. I'll look at it. But they've seen your letter. They've seen, at least they've read beyond the first page. They like your writing, and the synopsis is just to reassure them that this book will actually pan out 300 pages, that you have enough story, and that is only. It's almost like the framework of the story, and within that framework, they know that you're going to put all the other business.
Yeah.
So it's just they've read the first bit. That looks good, fine, tick, and if they love it, they'll ask for the rest. Yeah,
I think you're right. I think it's the last thing that they read, really, before they ask for a full submission or whatever. They're going to read.
Yes, they won't even, if they don't like the first page of your book, they won't read the synopsis.
No.
So you're really, you don't
safe.
make an idiot of yourself in your submission letter.
Yeah.
By spelling their name wrong or whatever.
And writing it incorrect.
Which I did do once.
It's easy to do, yeah.
And then then you have a cracking first 3 chapters and a decent synopsis that is literate and just clearly spells out how you get from A to B without all the Princess Bride bits in the middle. So that's a very long and complicated story.
Absolutely. So considering all these difficulties and challenges with what you do and being a writer, have you ever asked yourself why you write and what makes you continue to do it?
Yes, I do sometimes ask myself that. But I think it's an odd mixture. Number one, writing becomes addictive.
Yeah.
Very quickly. The process, even when you're not published, the whole process of sending out your submission, it's like doing the lottery. It's a gamble.
Yeah.
So you become quite addicted to that. And then, you write, you publish, you realise you're not really going to be J.K. Rowling and make millions of pounds. You'd be lucky if you could make a decent living. Mm-hmm. So you you lose your illusions on that score. But the other thing is you meet a lot of really wonderful, interesting people, and you have a lot of fun. So I like that side of it. I like that side of being traditionally published. And I enjoy it when a book goes out. But yes, I do sometimes, because I could make more money easier, doing what I did before, which was secretarial work. But I don't want to do that because I was miserable. Yeah,
well, that's the thing.
Yeah, you have to make your choices. And I should keep going, so I love it.
Yeah. So, and do you think it kind of being a writer affects the way you live your life and look at the world? I mean, do you ever switch off that part of your brain? I mean, you've already said a lot of your ideas come from conversations with friends and things.
Horrible socially at parties, but since starting to write, you develop an interest in other people, and suddenly it becomes very easy because you just ask somebody about themselves and off they go. For the next 20 minutes, you've got somebody telling you their life story. So for me, that has been wonderful because I've become a lot easier socially and happier to go out and go to parties because I know that I'm not going to be stuck in a corner, nothing to say to anybody.
It's a good conversation starter.
Tell me about your life.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think you're probably right. I think we probably naturally do that without realising. I'm always more happy to kind of just listen to people. When
yes, you do. You become an active listener. And people like that. They like being listened to.
And you can find out, as you say, more of these different things. Do you think people, I mean, do you ever find yourself zoning out when someone's telling you something, as in you think, oh my God, that's a great idea for a story, and you start, your mind starts going into action?
Well, I do tell them if I'm thinking that. Because not everybody. Some people think, oh, fantastic, use it. And some people say, don't you dare go anywhere near
Definitely
that.
don't.
But I do say that's really interesting. Can I use that?
Yeah, that's great. Okay, well, kind of as we wrap things up, do you want to give us a sense of what's up next? I know you're not going to tell us what the next book's necessarily about or whatever, but also tell people where they can find Invite Me In and more about you as well.
Invite Me In's on sale. I think it's in Asda and Tesco's and some Waterstones and Amazon, the usual places. The next book, I'm actually working on about 2 synopses in tandem because I'll do one and then I think, oh no, the other one's better. So I keep chopping and changing. Mm-hmm. I'm not quite sure where I am with that yet. I haven't. You get to a point where you either completely convince yourself that this is great and you really want to write it, or you kind of get disenchanted with it and you push it away. So I'm kind of nearing there.
And if people want to find you online, whereabouts do they find you?
I'm on Twitter. I'm on Instagram. I am on Facebook, but I don't really use it, and I don't particularly like Facebook. So the best place to find me is on Twitter. I like talking to people and interacting on Twitter. It's Emma Curtis Books.
All right, Emma, well, it's been brilliant to talk to you again. Thanks for coming on. I loved your book as well, and I know all the people will if they go and check it out. They definitely should. But for the time being, thanks a million for coming on Joined Up Writing.
Well, thank you very much for having me again, Wayne.
Joined Up Writing.
There you go. Thanks again to Emma Curtis, whose book Invite Me In is available right now. Great premise, nuanced characters and a tight plot. I loved it, so go and get it. I'll put all of Emma's links in the show notes over at joinedupwriting.co.uk. That's it for this week, but don't forget you can find the entire back catalogue of interviews on the website. Make sure you subscribe at Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Overcast, YouTube, or wherever else you get your podcasts from, and then you can have the podcast downloaded automatically every single time. Also, remember to leave us a nice rating and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever else. And please, 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 just tell a friend or friends about the podcast, because that's how we grow the listeners. Other than that, thanks a million for listening. I'm Wayne Kelly. Happy writing, stay safe, and I'll see you next time.